Hello, and welcome back to episode 3 of the Fiction Hack podcast. That's right, we have a name now. If you were listening to the first 2 episodes, you'll have heard us agonizing over a name, but we've now got a name.
A very good name.
Yes, so my name's Colin Monroe, and this is...
Ross Lawhead. Thanks so much for having me.
Yep, you're welcome. So yeah, do you want to say something about the name? What do you think of our name?
I think it's awesome. Fiction Hack is the official name of the podcast now, and it says it all, I think. Fits in great with our tagline, which is unlocking a deeper understanding in modern story. So, yeah, I'm not sure who came up with that, but whoever did was a bloody genius, if you don't mind me saying.
Yeah, so the show is on the road now that it has a name.
Indeed.
Yeah. So what's this episode about?
Well, Colin, it's about jumping the shark. And some people are going to say that it's far too early for a podcast such as ours to jump the shark, but we're going to do it anyway.
Yeah, I reckon like 50% of people haven't never heard it and don't know what it is. Because I remember I hadn't heard it until a few months ago.
Really?
So yeah.
That's surprising because, I mean, it is something that we learned about in film writing school. But, okay, before we go any further, why don't you tell us what it is? And
okay.
Then...
Right, so jumping the shark is when you in a sort of TV show or a movie franchise, you get to a point where the material gets a bit thin, and for whatever reason, and writers start to go a little bit more ridiculous, and it gets, so it's that point where things kind of go downhill. And the origin is from Happy Days, the TV show Happy Days. There was an episode where the Fonz is water skiing, and for some reason he made a bet or something where he could jump over a shark whilst water skiing, which is totally ridiculous. And people identified that as the point when the show started to go downhill.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you're right in saying that it applies to something that is not a longer narrative, so it doesn't really have an arc, like a series arc even, something that's aiming towards, but it is something that's episodic. Yeah. So something that repeats and resets after each, 30-minute, 40-minute, 20-minute even episode. So, like, it wouldn't apply to an hour-and-a-half movie like, Jurassic Park or something like that, or something that, goes bad at some point, but it is something a longer sustained kind of narrative. So TV shows generally could be, radio, something like that. And it's not so common anymore because some of these TV series do have longer arcs.
Yeah, well, there was a rule. That was the difference between television writing and movie writing. It's like movie writing is all about character development. TV writing was all about the kind of plot within the episode. And at the end of the episode, your characters had to go back to where they were at the beginning, and if you look at like The Simpsons, the fact that Bart Simpson's still a 10-year-old boy, even though the show's 30 years old now. That's a good example.
Yeah, no, that's right. And so, I mean, it was about kind of character revelation, not character development. And you're right about the plot and the situation. Well, it's a situation comedy, so a sitcom. So yeah, it is more focused on kind of what's happening, and then it all has to reset. And the idea for that is because, you might miss it a week and there's no way to see it again. You can't stream it, you can't tape it, you can't, it's just gone forever unless they play it again in a year's time. So
it had to make sense if you came in and missed a couple of episodes, because it all goes back to the days of before we had Netflix and when TV was not on demand. It was, you had to watch it. Yeah. You had to watch it when they wanted you to watch it.
I've got a theory about when that
schedule.
Yeah, I've got a theory about when that changed. When do you think it changed? Like, when do you think that they started creating series arcs?
Well, I think, as I remember it, the first show that did it a lot, the first sort of long-form show that did that was like 24. That's the first one I remember of actually watching.
I think it actually changed with Friends. Now, hear me out on this. It was the Ross Rachel storyline. If you watch the first season of Friends, it is one of those ones where it just goes back to the beginning. Nothing really develops. But then they started doing this Ross Rachel relationship, and the fans really clung on to that. And so I think the writer said, well, let's just kind of run with this a little bit. Let's build the tension and let's have a payoff. I think the payoff was way too soon. I think it was a bad payoff. And it kind of sent the show into a downwards turn. Which meant it jumped the shark, exactly. Which meant that then they had to find relationships for everybody else in the group to kind of form within the group, and then you had the Rachel Joey thing. Everybody always keeps pointing at as basically
just like real life,
the worst. Exactly, yeah. Everybody pairing up with each other in your close knit group of friends. Which I don't think is. I can't think of anyone who's done that. So I think other shows started to take that lead, and I think that Friends was that popular that people were buying it on video at that time. And then I think that people were seeing, the industry was seeing, well, wait, these kind of developments are actually driving sales. Like we can sell the advertising for the shows themselves, but then we can sell the videos on the back of that if people are interested enough in the stories. And so, I think 24 was one that cashed in big on that. That was the entire appeal of that show, was that every episode was an hour in this person's life. And if you missed an episode, then you had to go find that somehow.
But I've just thought of a couple of other things. It's like, obviously it has to be something where the whole where the show starts to air, and then they start to write more series. It can't be a mini series where they write the whole thing before they even shoot anything.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Exactly.
But so go. I was thinking back to like British television used to be. It was traditionally much shorter. We had like 6 episodes in a series. If you think of British sitcoms from the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, Fawlty Towers, Blackadder.
Yeah, that kind of thing. They had like 6 episodes per season. That was standard, which is tiny, which is nothing compared to American standards. And shows would run for 2 or 3 seasons maximum. Yeah. Or not maximum, but like that was normal.
Yeah, because the actors would usually move on at that point. Because it would take them 4 or 5 years to do those 4 seasons, and then people's lives move on.
I think Jumping the Shark is it's a result of TV shows wanting to, or the executives wanting to keep thrashing a dead horse in a way. And one example of that is Heroes, where Heroes was so obviously supposed to end. You could see how it was meant to end at the end of the first season. It was brilliant. It would have been brilliant. But then you can see how they just changed a few lines to make Sylar get away. And I
would actually go further.
And they just ruined it from that point on.
Because the thing with even even 24, the American TV shows with the arc. I remember watching a behind-the-scenes documentary for 24, and they're like, "Okay, well, so here's the writers' room. Yeah, we finished the first 12 episodes. This is where we get to have a little bit of a break. We get to catch up on sleep, and then we come and we decide how it's going to end after that." And that blew my mind. It was like, so they're sitting down to write 24, this intricate kind of show that is very continuity heavy, and they don't even know how the second half of the story is going to resolve, and that happened, I think, with Heroes. Again, it's these shows that kind of blow up big. And I'm going to have a couple examples, but Heroes is a really good example of a show. Basically, I think... Okay, well, this is what I wanted to get into after we started... after you kind of explained the concept of jumping the shark. Because you're absolutely right. Like, it does apply to something where the entire story is not already set out, where you do keep having these episodes just kind of continue coming back to it, and refreshing each time, by and large. But so I haven't watched Happy Days. I didn't watch that episode of the Jumping the Shark. But I would say, I would assume that the cracks are already showing in a show like that. But then Jumping the Shark is the moment where it all just kind of collapses in on itself. So already, the fatiguing and the signs of stress would have been there with the jokes and the situations. But, then the Jumping the Shark moment just comes, and it's clear to everybody that they're just out of ideas pretty much. And I think that's what I wanted to sort of get back to with Star Wars, because I think that did happen. I think we talked about that a little bit.
Is it a good idea to get back to Star Wars?
No, we'll do it at the end.
Go off on one?
We'll do that at the end. We'll talk about this first, and then we'll come back to the end, and I'll make my case, and then I won't say anything more about it for the entire podcast, I swear. Because I think that those cracks sometimes appear when the show is strongest, when it has its strongest moment, but then that sets it off onto a bad track that will just, that's kind of has...
Like what you were saying about Friends.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, exactly. So the guys in the writers' room said, "Well, look, or maybe it wasn't even the writers. Maybe it's the producers who say, look, the audience is eating up all this relationship stuff. Yeah. So you've got to put more of that in." And it's like, well, we just don't have any more relationships. And they're like, well, what about this Joey character? And what about this Rachel lady? Let's get them together. And then then bad stuff happens. So okay, should we do some examples or? Let's see, what were you talking about?
Yeah, well, we've mentioned a few. We mentioned Heroes. What about The Simpsons? Do you think The Simpsons has jumped the shark?
Well, I don't know. I haven't watched it in about 10 years. I assume that it has. And this is the other thing. It's like, I mean, of course a show will continually get worse. But does there have to be a jumping the shark moment? I don't know.
Yeah, is jumping the shark a prerequisite to getting cancelled?
Or just being a bad show? I mean, because again, I was thinking about Big Bang Theory because I used to be big, I used to really like that show, but then my interest just kind of tapered off when I saw it wasn't really going anywhere. There wasn't a single episode or a moment like the Jump the Shark and Happy Days where I could point to it and say, this is the moment where they lost me.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I feel like I could do that with Star Wars because, again, I think that applies right now to our definition because although it is a franchise with a single continuous thread, it's not. It wasn't conceived as 9 episodes, or at least the 9 episodes that we've got now. But yeah, okay. So Heroes, and I would say Lost as well. I think Heroes,
Lost totally, yeah,
and Lost are two of the indisputable.
Yeah. I remember being so dissatisfied with Lost and how when we found out that they didn't know where it was going, the writers didn't know where they were going.
Yeah,
and being so disappointed. And I was living with my friends who I had a video production company with at the time, and we started. That sort of inspired us to actually start writing a TV show that actually was going somewhere and that we knew where it was heading from the beginning, instead of just opening up these questions and figuring out what they are afterwards. It goes back to the mystery box, doesn't it?
The mystery box. So I think that they actually had a plan in mind for what the island was and where it was going. I think they changed that after season 3. I remember my brother actually looked into this and found a bunch of quotes from interviews and stuff. And even J.J. Abrams is on record as saying, yeah, the show really ended up in a different place than when it started. I don't really know why the writers decided to do that. And that made me angry in itself because he's the producer of the show. If anyone's there to keep the writers on track, it's him, and ensure quality control. But I think that what it was, and you have to remember with Lost, again, with Friends, you sort of take it back into context. And that was really kind of the first show that grabbed the internet, essentially. There was so much of each episode where people would go online to the chat rooms and try to figure out what it was. That was a big part of the success of that show, because then people started... I remember seeing newspaper articles about the chat rooms that people were going to discuss this show on. So I mean that's just kind of weird, just how the media kind of feeds back on itself. But so what I think happened was that the internet basically figured it out, or more and more people were figuring out what the deal was on the island, and the producers or the writers decided, well, look, we have to keep tricking people, because that's what made this show in the first place. So we need to have more mysteries that people can go back into the chat rooms and talk about, so that newspapers can report on the feedback in the chat room. I remember, I think in the magazine, the magazines I was getting at the time were kind of doing a roundup of fan theories and all that kind of stuff. So it was kind of crazy. But
But it ended up just being nothing.
It ended up being nothing.
It was like every possible outcome had been thought of on the internet, and in order to avoid them all, they ended up with just nothing happening.
And it made
really.
the characters behave in a really weird way, because at the end, so they're all on the island. Okay, well, what I think it was from the beginning is that island was a kind of purgatory, and they were either on their way to being dead or caught in between death and life, and then it was going to resolve in one of those directions. Either the characters die or they come back to life, or they or both.
Did you have the kind of God
characters.
Satan characters in the background there? You think that was well, you didn't really. You only at the beginning you only had the smoke monster.
Not up until season 3.
Only...
only when you got to at the end of season 3, they went to the hut and Locke talks or finds out about Jacob, but you don't see Jacob. Jacob was introduced, I think, season 4. I don't know. I only watched them all once, but I do remember thinking that 3 was the turning point. The cabin was the big mystery box that they put at the end. I think that was the jumping the shark moment, which just said, well, let's just have any mystery and let's have I think they're trying to trick the internet by picking the solution that the least number of people had figured out, and
just to kind of outsmart them,
try to outsmart the internet, and I don't think you can outsmart the collective. Instead of saying, well, let's just pay this off in the best way and make sure that it's a really satisfying story, they're like, let's just keep this running, let's just try to keep the hype going.
It'll be way better to just go on the internet and see what the best theory is and use that.
Exactly. I think Heroes
anyway,
did the same thing.
I don't want to talk too much. I don't want to talk too much about Lost, because we could probably do a whole episode on Lost.
I think Heroes did the same thing, but in a slightly different way. They and I think it was a slightly different thing, which was that I think they enjoyed the payoff of they looked at I think they did what you're suggesting now that I think about it, is actually what they did was look at the chat rooms and say, well, what are people enjoying about this show? And let's just give them more of that. And what they were enjoying was what they enjoyed about Lost, which is all the connections of these characters in their lives and stuff. And so then they started doing things which I think really worked against the show, even in the first season, which was like, well, okay, the big bad guy, his daughter is the cheerleader. I don't think that was in the original series Bible. This person is this person's brother, and these two people have this relationship, and all that kind of stuff. And then it just got to the end. Everybody is interconnected with everybody else for no real reason. And someone pointed out, okay, so my brother and I, we watched every episode of season 1, New Year's Eve. I think it was 2001 or something like that. So we watched it all in one night. And I think he pointed out that Siler, the bad guy, he's not even involved in the problem at the end. The problem at the end is that one guy is going to blow up and the other guy can save him. And so it's a really nice moment. I like it a lot. With, the two brothers deciding to sacrifice a whole lot just to save the world. But you've got this bad guy going around slicing people's brains open, who's just... You can take him out. Reason, right? Yeah. And they keep saying he's the bad guy. Well, he kills people, but he's not the person who's going to end the world. And then the whole save the cheerleader, save the world thing doesn't really come up to anything, because, she's there, but she doesn't have to be. So, I think that went kind of the other way from Lost, but it kind of ended up in the same way. But
it's the same thing. It boils down to them wanting to extend a show beyond its natural momentum.
Right. Yeah. Well, or is it? Because, with Lost, if it's just stayed on track, I think it would have been great. We would all still be watching Lost again, instead of hating it.
No, I think Lost, if it did, without them knowing where it was going, it was going to die. It had to have an end and get there.
Yeah, I think it had that, but they just abandoned it at one point. And I wonder with Heroes, I don't think Heroes was a sophisticated show. I don't think they had it in mind. They just said, I think they had 4 episodes that are great setup, good scripts, and they said, yeah, let's go with that. And then with season 2,
I don't know. I really sensed in the last episode that it could have ended well, if that had been the end. Okay, let me ask you about Game of Thrones then, because I know that you groaned when I mentioned that in a previous episode.
Yeah.
So you think
Game of
why was
Thrones,
that?
more like.
Has that? So do you think that's jumped the shark? Did you like it at the beginning? Do you think they've dragged it out too long?
I don't think it has jumped the shark
Or is
because it stayed true to what it is all the way through. I think George Martin probably does have a resolution in mind for where he wants
Yeah.
to take the books.
Yeah, and I think he's shared that with the writers. What are they called? Benioff and
Yeah, or they've just figured out something that works well with the TV show, and I think that's fine also. But
yeah, so they know where they're going.
For me, it's just I think it's because it's so much of the same thing that I'm not on board with it anymore. It's just such a bummer. It's just so relentless, all this bad stuff happening, that I just can't take it anymore. So I've watched the first 2 seasons, and and then I was like, okay, I'm done. And actually I've read the first 4 books, and as soon as I saw that it was just like, I mean, it all happens within just a few years, if that. It's worse than EastEnders, these people's lives, the stuff they go through and get put through. I was like, okay, so, what we've got here is a Grapes of Wrath situation, is that the characters are just going to end and the story is just going to stop, and then that'll be it. I couldn't see anything great coming out of it because all the people who I liked were being too corrupted just by being in that universe. In the end, the only person I really cared about was Tyrion, who I think is the only one that people still care about, what happens to him. But I think that's just kind of
the ending's basically going to be
freak of odds.
Lots of people get their revenge and they all live happily ever after.
No, I don't think there is a happily ever after.
No, no. Actually, I think George R. Martin's actually said that it's going to be really, really
I hear
the ending.
Yeah, I hear things like you hear news reports. Have you heard what happened in Westeros lately? This happened. Oh man, those guys got to sort their lives out. But so it seems like it's pretty crazy right now. But again, I wouldn't say it jumped the shark because there's not a turning point for the downwards quality. The best example I could find of what I'm trying to explain was Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And there was an episode in season, is it 4 or 5? It's called The Body, okay? So you set up the Buffy the Vampire Slayer. She's this cheerleader who's got supernatural abilities to fight vampires. Okay, it's a great pure concept. And to develop it for TV, you've got a cast of characters who you develop, who can have their own side adventures and feed into the development of the main character. And although each season did have an arc, it wasn't really kind of going to end up in any one place because there wasn't any big problem that needed to be solved, really. Then there was an episode called The Body, which is very famous because it's very good. It was written by Joss Whedon. I think it was the first time he directed as well for television. And I think it won a few Emmys. He won an award for writing it, I'm pretty sure, possibly directing it. I should have looked up all this information. But people who know the show know this episode. And what happened in it, spoiler alert, is that Buffy's mother dies. She just dies. She wasn't killed by a vampire. She wasn't, it wasn't, misadventure from one of their, great grand schemes or anything like that. Her mother just died in a very kind of natural way. And it was about just kind of grief and mourning and the unbelief of what has happened in that situation. And it was done very well. So anyone who's gone through that kind of loss would really identify with what happens to you in that, the denial and just the anger and just the weirdness of it all, just kind of how life is just kind of taken out of time. And that was all communicated in the way it was directed and the way it was scripted. And the way it was acted, it's all very good. So everything was firing on all cylinders for that. And it won awards. Everybody loved it. But what happened after that was that the metaphor of vampires then got completely trivialized because you've taken all the power away from the metaphor of Buffy fighting these supernatural events and going through these things. Suddenly it wasn't...
So when you say the metaphor, what do you mean the original metaphor of what vampires...
Exactly, yeah. Of what vampires stand for, what their purpose is to the character of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Not necessarily. In that show. So how they were using vampires in that show.
In the show,
or the monsters of the week kind of thing. So because she was dealing with this on a super realistic level, it really took away the power of dealing with it on a metaphorical level. And I think it took the series. I say it got back on track in season 7. Some people disagree. They think that it never got back on track, although they don't really identify that episode as being the one where it all went downhill. And then you had the musical episode, and the musical episode was great. But after that, she was. I mean, I don't want to. I mean, okay, it is a fiction show, but I don't want to, as well trivialize what she was going through, because the death of a parent, is a really serious thing. But there was no kind of joy or happiness in the show. They felt like they had to really kind of work through these emotions, I think, to a greater extent than was needed, really. And like I say, it took the show until season 7, so a season and a half, maybe 2 seasons to get back on track after that.
Right. So looking at that from as a jump the shark example, how's that different to the other ones we've talked about? Because it's similar, although it's not so much that the executives trying to drag it out longer, but it is that the writers have sort of given it such a big thing.
Yeah,
that's changed the underlying foundation of the show.
Yeah, well, I'll bring Star Wars in to support this, because maybe we need a new terminology for this. Maybe what we're describing is not jump the shark. Maybe it's something else. I think it happens in Star Wars with The Empire Strikes Back and the Luke, I'm your father moment. Oh, sorry, spoilers for that as well. So Darth Vader saying to Luke, I'm your father. Up until that point, and we talked about this last week, like the strength of Star Wars has always been just kind of throwing this wacky stuff at you and saying that this is normal, You have this big Wookiee character who Han Solo is just treating as an equal, and he's understanding even though he's speaking this other language. He's saying things like, this is the ship that made the Kessel run in less than 24 parsecs, if he's fast enough for the old man. It's like, oh yeah, there's Jedis, and this is a lightsaber, and this is this. And, this stuff is shown, but it's not explained. And that's what's great about Star Wars. And I would say...
exposition.
The lack of exposition. It's just saying, well, this,
right.
It's just, not even saying what an X-Wing is, how, not showing the man who designed the X-Wing and the conflicts he had with his family and all this kind of stuff. It's just saying...
And why the Millennium Falcon is that shape with the cockpit over to one side.
Yeah, what a piece of junk. It's not showing why it's a piece of junk, which apparently, I guess, is what you're getting in the Solo movie. But this is the thing, is that, okay, so Lucas, it's no secret that he changed a lot of his plans from the beginning of even just A New Hope to Return of the Jedi. That resolved in a completely different way than he had set out originally in his notes. And one of those changes was making Darth Vader Luke's father. So if you look at Star Wars, everything that Obi-Wan says is true. Was going to be true, sorry, I should say, which is that his father was going to be a pilot who Obi-Wan happened to know, who's dead now, who's killed by Darth Vader. It's because then you've got that hilarious backtracking in Return of the Jedi where Obi-Wan appears to him and says, so what I told you was true from a certain point of view. And then Luke says, a certain point of view? And that's a great example of what you call in the writing trade hanging a lantern on it, which we could do another part episode on as well.
Okay.
But making that connection was a big cinema moment. It's one of the great cinema moments of all time. Because it's meaningful, and it creates this added layer of conflict and tension between these characters. But what we've got after that is Lucas's decision to keep trying to tie everything back in on itself. So from that moment, the Star Wars universe is no longer expanding. You're not seeing any new locations. You're not seeing any new characters except for Endor and the Ewoks, which people have mixed emotions about. I like the Ewoks myself. But you've got people continually going back to Tatooine. Like, why? Why do people keep going back to Tatooine? How many episodes of the Star Wars universe has taken place in this desert planet? If there's a planet that's furthest from the universe's core, that's it. Sometimes it works. Because I think with Return of the Jedi, them going back to Tatooine and, Han going back to Tatooine, it's like, yeah, sometimes in our lives we've got unresolved issues that we have to go back to, where we came from to solve them. But then there's no reason at all for Anakin Skywalker to have been born on Tatooine. There's no reason for him to even be called Skywalker. Why is Anakin Skywalker called Anakin Skywalker? Why would Obi-Wan take Anakin's child, who he's trying to hide from him, back to the planet that he was born on and give him the same last name? That just seems like ridiculous. Anyway.
Well, he had other family there because he had his uncle, and
was it his uncle?
There was. I assumed it was really his uncle.
It's not his uncle. He doesn't have any brothers or sisters. So what we've got is just the franchise's just almost this fixation on explaining every last thing. So now you can't suddenly throw out, okay, well, this is a Wookiee, this is a Kessel Run, this is a starship. It's like, we have to explain all of this. We have to explain what a Kessel Run is. We have to explain what the Millennium Falcon is. We have to explain what Lando is. We have to explain. So, yeah.
So now even though filling in all the gaps, aren't
exactly,
they? Like...
filling in all the gaps. And that's, I just can't take that anymore. That's one of the two reasons why I've got no interest in this anymore, because it's not getting bigger. It's just getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So I would
someone
say,
who has no interest, you do keep bringing it up quite a lot.
I know, I do. So I
this is only
swear this is the
episode
last
3,
time.
and 2 of them now have been like at least half about Star Wars.
And the Death Star. It's like, how many times are they going to have the Death Star be there? Okay, let's see. We've got New Hope, Return of the Jedi, Rogue One, and Force Awakens. 4 out of the 8 core movies have had this Death Star in them. That seems... Oh, wait, no. Let's throw in Revenge of the Sith in there as well. So over half have featured the Death Star in them. It's not a universe that's getting bigger. It's getting smaller. So I would say that again, maybe we need a new word for this, a new term other than jump the shark. But I think that's a jump the shark moment, is the revelation of Darth Vader to Luke that he's his father. I don't know. What do you think? Does that hold water?
Yeah, it definitely holds water. Yeah. Yeah. I just don't think we need to keep going on about it so much.
Okay, that's the last I'll say.
But although, hang on a minute. Maybe I've misunderstood. Maybe this podcast is actually going to be, or every episode is going to be brought back to Star Wars in some way. And although you keep saying you don't want to talk about Star Wars, you clearly do. And that this is like some kind of therapy for you.
Each episode will dissolve into an angry rant about Star Wars and George Lucas.
I mean, yeah, we could do that. That could be a thing. That could be a segment.
I don't know if the internet needs that.
No, that's true. It doesn't. But maybe you do.
Well, that's a different matter. But I'm looking forward to next episode, which hopefully will be Star Wars free. Probably the furthest we can get away from Star Wars. This was your idea. Do we want to talk about it now, or should we save it for next week?
What I was thinking, I've often said, I mean, I work in a used bookshop, and we often get Dickens books come along, and I have a long running dislike. I won't say hatred, dislike of Charles Dickens, because for reasons that I will go into in the next episode.
Interesting.
Now I'm probably wrong. I'm probably judging all of his work on one thing. Okay. So I'm probably wrong, and I'm looking forward to you correcting me, which is probably what this is going to be about. But I've always enjoyed ranting about why I hate Dickens, because it's a kind of controversial opinion.
Is this what the podcast is going to be for you, Colin? It's just going to be you bringing back to Dickens and just saying why you hate Dickens?
No. But you're saying that Dickens is to me what Star Wars is to you? No, it's definitely not.
Do you know that Dickens is Star Wars' father? Spoiler alert. Yeah, see, The podcast has gone downhill. See, we've jumped the shark already.
Yeah, we've jumped the shark now. Yeah. We've already jumped the shark.
I say get it out of the way. Release the tension. Just start that downward cycle as soon as you can. Okay. Yeah, so just...
then the only way's up.
Yeah. See, lower people's expectations.
I don't know, actually, because it depends.
Rock bottom.
You have to get right to You have to get right to rock bottom.
Get right to rock bottom before you can start going back up again. But you can only get to the bottom if you start getting worse, and that's what we've done here.
Yeah.
Which I'm proud about. So, are we going to cap off this idea of jump the shark, or have we said everything that we need to say about that? Just don't watch Lost. I think that's the message that we're saying, is that we're still angry about Lost.
Yeah, well, and also I think maybe jumping the shark has become, with the way that the industry has changed, the television industry, and now things are a lot more on demand stuff. Yeah. They don't know where stuff is going by halfway through the season. They're trying to give people what they want. then I think that jumping the shark will become almost more inevitable.
Yeah.
As because of those reasons.
Here's an interesting question. Do you think anything is what's the how do we use the metaphor? Like gotten better, gotten back on track? I would say
sharp.
Buffy. Yeah.
Oh, you mean got back?
Yeah.
Well, another question I was going to ask actually is it possible for something to jump the shark more than once?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. We may have to break out another episode for this.
Yeah, we might have to do Jump the Shark Part 2.
Part 2. No, we'll do that down the line when we've climbed back up and our quality's gotten really good.
Yeah, that's what I mean. We'll have a few weeks to think about it, and then we can do another episode on jumping the shark.
Yeah, again. When we need to go back down to that, we need to lower people's expectations again. We'll jump the shark again.
Okay, well that's it for this episode then.
Okay.
As I said, we've got a good episode lined up for next week.
Yeah.
So we'll see you then.
Looking forward to it. Okay. See you later.
Wait a minute. Hang on, we haven't started yet. No, I'll say hi. I'll start, and then we'll talk about it. Right. Okay. So, hello and welcome back to. Hang on, I think the sound was too loud there. Hello and welcome back to episode 3 of the Fiction Hack podcast.